Hi, welcome everybody. Here we are today, about to begin our session on how the pandemic is shaping the future of commerce. I'm your moderator, Andrew Lipsman. I'm the principal analyst covering retail and e-commerce trends at eMarketer. Joining us today are Kate Weiler, Director of Global Product Delivery from Discover, and Nick Basford, Vice President of Global Retail and E-commerce Strategy at UPS. And I'm going to let them both introduce themselves and what they do for their respective companies here. So Kate, why don't you kick it off?
Great, thank you, Andrew, and very happy to be with the audience today. As Andrew mentioned, I'm Kate Weiler. I work at Discover Financial Services, have been there just over 13 years in various roles throughout the card issuing business, as well as the payments industry where I currently reside, managing the adoption of advanced payment technologies with all of our network participants, ranging from cardholders, issuers, merchants, and acquirers.
Great, Nick.
Hi, everybody. So yes, I'm Nick Basford, Vice President of Global Retail and E-commerce Strategy at UPS. The first thing that nobody's shocked, I am in the United States. I have a Southern accent, but maybe not a Georgia accent. I'm from the UK originally, as you can probably tell. And my responsibilities at UPS really span all of our e-commerce strategy globally, be that the development and deployment of our capabilities, specifically aligned to the needs of e-commerce, through to accessibility and partnerships that we have, both of a customer type and of also development, co-development, and innovation and channel type as well. I've been with UPS for quite a long time, but I also have a history in financial services and technology going some way back as well. So that's me. All right.
Great. So why don't we begin before our discussion just by level setting of where we're at today in the world of commerce. So I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that the pandemic has created a dislocation probably unlike anything we've ever seen before. And I think it's giving us a real glimpse into what the future of commerce might be. I'll give everybody some high-level stats that we are actually just getting ready to unveil at eMarketer. So we update our e-commerce forecast and retail forecast 3 times a year, and our new one is just about to be published, and I'll kind of give you the top lines. So we, in our last forecast, were predicting an acceleration in e-commerce. Now, this was back in May, and really we were doing the forecast back in April. So we were only getting a glimpse of how big of a channel shift to e-commerce there was going to be. And we had upgraded our forecast at the time from about 13% to 18% for the full year. Well, things have changed quite a bit, and we've seen just a flood unleashed on e-commerce, and we are upgrading our forecast as we speak to 32% for the year. So just an enormous upward revision based on not only the spike we saw, concentrated in Q2, but the levels have remained elevated over, the course of Q3 and sort of what we're expecting into Q4. To put that in context, that is an incremental increase in e-commerce spending of $86 billion. So just this huge bucket of dollars is now shifting online. The pandemic is also driving just inordinate shifts in consumer behavior. Of course, we've seen the channel shifting as people maybe feel less comfortable in stores, or they don't have the option to shop in stores, and they're moving to e-commerce for a lot of that. And we see that happen in various ways across different categories. It's also been a huge accelerant to the rise of what I've been calling frictionless commerce. And this is, as I define it, kind of the next wave of where retail is going. We think about the early days of digital commerce. The kind of core drivers of consumer behavior are price, product selection, and convenience. And so the earliest days, really, when the internet kind of brought us the long tail, right? The everything store with Amazon was all about the long tail of products. So that gave us selection. So that was the first thing that digital kind of ticked off. The second era was price, where you really had this price transparency. People could search, price comparison shop. And so you saw that prices really came into line with one another, especially for non-differentiated products. This last era, and I think is actually the most interesting, is being fought on the dimension of convenience. And that can be determined in a lot of different ways across all of the retail channels. We see convenience, a new era of convenience entering brick and mortar retail. Obviously e-commerce as things get faster and more streamlined. And then also as those two channels work with one another in an omni-channel sense. So that's how we're gonna structure our talk today. The fundamental question that I think we're gonna interrogate here today is we see that we have catapulted into the future here. As Nick and others have liked to say, we fast forwarded 3 years in 3 months' time in those early days of the pandemic. But given that's the case, the question I think that now arises is, to what extent have we catapulted permanently into the future, or to what extent will some of these behaviors revert, at least in the direction of where we were before? So with that, let's kick off the conversation, and we're going to talk about how the pandemic is shaping the future of commerce in brick and mortar retail. And I want to begin with Kate. So my first question for you, Kate, is when we think about the future of American retail stores, restaurants, things of that nature, how will stores need to function in order to meet these fast evolving expectations of customers?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question, Andrew. And I think it's unfortunate that it's taken a pandemic such as COVID-19 to build this ubiquity around contactless payments. And to your point, creating that frictionless and touch-free that now our consumers are demanding and centered around that convenience. So with the pandemic, we have only seen the interest of contactless rise and highlighting the need for the technology to continue to evolve, keeping both consumers and our merchants safe. The overall usage of contactless in the US has risen over 150% since last year. And again, the expectations and perspective and behavior towards contactless has changed too. So based on a recent survey that Discover completed, we found over half of our cardholders have a more positive perception on contactless after the pandemic, and nearly 50% are now more likely to use it. Interestingly enough, over half have also cited that they would like to be using contactless payments because it is a more clean and sanitary option. With the current conditions, customers are also expecting retailers to adopt and offer more socially distant checkout experiences. So again, a recent survey finding over 75% of consumers said the availability of payment kiosks enabling that self-checkout experience improve their visit to the merchant. And then nearly 2/3 of the consumers would like the mobile devices enabling the payment experience. So again, in some retailers, we have seen the mobile point of sale with retail members walking around the store, again, providing that distance and safer experience for consumers.
So a lot of these technologies that you're mentioning, interestingly, had already kind of reached wider penetration in parts of Europe, of course, Asia, really all other parts of the world. The US is kind of laggard in adopting a lot of these technologies. And this was all before the pandemic even hit, right? So the pandemic, in some ways, you can argue, is creating a need, an urgent need that wasn't there before. But to what extent do we think that this, permanently shifts the way that people think about paying in the future, even when, the concern around germs may not be quite as acute?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more habit forming. And again, that expectation of the consumer around the convenience and safety when they are conducting purchases in a brick and mortar location. I would expect to see this to continue to take shape. And again, these technologies existed prior, but again, the adoption that we're seeing is much more on an upward trajectory, and do expect to see that continue and stay high in terms of how consumers are wanting to transact when they go in store.
So Nick, when you think about the future of retail stores, we talked a little bit about how maybe in the past stores were all about inventory and kind of going there to procure inventory. Maybe it's shifting a bit more in the direction of experience. How do you see stores having to adapt to this new reality of how people want to engage in commerce, and what the future of stores really looks like?
It's a great question, and I think there was a momentum before the pandemic, Andrew, to reevaluate the role of the store, its purpose, and how it fits, and it's the commercial model and the technology model that supports it. And I think now we've seen an acceleration. You mentioned 3 years in 3 months. That's the demand side, but the capability side, couldn't move that fast. So let's talk about stores. I talk to a lot of obviously retailers. We connect not just to their supply chains, but to the technology platforms there for the proposition. And there's kind of 3 themes I think I would highlight. The first is not really one I can talk too much to, other than I see a lot of work going on in the stores to say, so how am I going to attract, if you like, the buyers, the customers that may have left me temporarily or permanently as a result of the pandemic. And, the overall whole store proposition, Kate mentioned payment, but you mentioned inventory, the whole shopping experience. I'm not too qualified to talk about that, but that's certainly a big deal. But the second 2, we're involved in a lot. And the second one is really, how does the retailer leverage the footprint going forwards? And let's firstly talk about, the store being considered as a fulfillment location, not just a location for people to visit. So it's a fulfillment location to dispatch, local deliveries. It's also a location for people, to bring in person returns. But even both of those have the fulfillment and the returns have different technology and supply chain implications. Simple state from a fulfillment perspective is a store is not designed in the same way that a warehouse is. Right? I use the simple analogy. It goes back, maybe I'm a little older, the generation is in the store. You used to put the milk and the eggs in the back and the candy by the checkout, right? So people have to stay. It traps people inside and to shop. A fulfillment center is completely the opposite. It's designed to operate in seconds, to get things out and efficiently. And during this period where maybe there is some marginal cost and time to be consumed, it's okay. But ultimately, stores are wrestling, retailers are wrestling with how do you design for people, for returns, and even returns has implications with it. There's a triage element of returns. Do you put it back into stock? Do you send it for some kind of disposal? Do you resell it on? Things of that kind. So there's that. That's a big deal right now for the retailer out there, is to try and figure out, say, how to leverage the footprint. And my third one, so first was the design, the second is the footprint. The third one, Andrew, which is really interesting, is there's an awful lot of discussions going on out there now, and work and progress, but retailers deciding if they're actually going to be kind of a third party, they're going to actually operate there on behalf of third parties, even competitors. Right? I've heard even the dilemma in boardrooms of retailers. How would you feel about somebody coming into your branded store and your experience and walking out of the door with a box that has a smiley face on it? Right? As a third party pickup location, that creates dilemmas in terms of branding. It creates huge technology challenges as to how do you connect to this kind of third-party ecosystem and leverage your footprint, but now you go beyond leveraging it for yourself. you move into also leveraging it as part of a broader e-commerce role. So those I would say, and they escalate in terms of the technology implications and the complexity. Because once you get to that final point, the level of nobody wants, their retail assistants to be using multiple applications, multiple devices to support multiple different activities going on inside a store. But to actually shift to this kind of multi-application platforms is quite a big deal of a rebuild. And I would say that's one of the things, including, even payment. Returns require a refund. Well, maybe you're refunding another retailer. How do you process that, financial transaction? I see a lot going on in the stores, Andrew, and they would be my three big themes that I would bring to everybody's attention.
Yeah, it seems that as we look at some of the biggest winners in the retail space during the pandemic, many of them have been the big box retailers who, while they certainly benefited from being essential good retailers, they also have spent the last several years really retooling their operations to enable exactly what you're talking about. And I think a lot of stores are now having to make similar types of transitions so they can be as nimble and in meeting the needs of customers. So one area that we've seen this also magnified is with local merchants, mom and pop shops, local restaurants, and they've been forced into this digital transformation that they probably never expected. Maybe they were taking online orders or doing a little bit of digital, but it wasn't part of their DNA. And now it's maybe the only way that they have if they want to sell their goods. Kate, I'm curious if you can talk about some of the technologies in that context that you've seen emerge to help streamline ordering, payment, checkout, and make the sequence of commerce more viable for what were previously pretty analog kind of operations.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of it gets grounded on this contactless or digital experience. We see a lot of order online and pick up in store. Again, this is what the consumers are now demanding because they don't want to spend a lot of that time in the physical location. So they know what they need. They want to be able to place that order online and pick up in store. We're seeing that a lot in the grocery vertical. Certainly in an area where we thought there may have been a slower adoption for that because people want to feel their produce or understand what they're getting. But again, that convenience to the consumer, the merchants need to evolve and allow these options based on how that consumer wants to interact with that retailer. In terms of restaurants, I think we've seen a lot of evolution in the restaurants who have opened up, and I've personally experienced, we're seeing them evolve the way that they present the information to the consumer. So when you walk into the restaurant, they'll have a QR code, again, allowing that merchant to give the consumer the menu in their hands. It reduces the ability for that consumer to touch the menu that the prior customers may have used. And again, we see QR codes also as part of the payment experience, where the contactless ordering is an option that the consumers want to have. Not only contactless technology with a physical plastic or mobile device, but having that QR code to convey the payment. Again, this requires a lot of not heavy lifting, but evolution internally, both at retailers and merchants of all categories, to invest in their digital systems and provide that Omni Channel experience that the consumers are now accustomed to and will continue to see that trend.
I love the QR codes, by the way, have gotten their second life after we were ready to kill off this technology. Now it's actually really streamlined. The couple of times where I've done outdoor restaurant dining, the whole process, which in the American experience, the number of interactions that are required to get your menu and the server going back and forth, and then when you pay with your check, it's minimized those number of interactions, I think, extraordinarily. Let's shift gears now to talking about e-commerce. This is the big wave that we've been seeing in the pandemic era. And one of the biggest shifts has been the shift the rise of fast and free delivery. So this was a trend well before the pandemic. One of the things we've seen is that click to door time. So from the time that you order something to the time it comes to your door, over the last several years, just keeps going down and down and down. And Amazon is the pace setter here. They're kind of setting records in terms of that, but the whole industry has seen those times shrink along with it. So I guess my question, Nick, to you is, now that we're getting more next day delivery, and essentially that time dimension, that immediacy dimension of e-commerce is becoming closer to parity with some of the value proposition of brick and mortar, how do you see that changing consumer behavior, and what do you think that means for the future of e-commerce?
So I think it's interesting right now. I mean, if you could connect speed. I think there's a context speed, and there's a convenience element to it. There's an experience element to it. And what I mean by that is, if you absolutely have to have it, same day, next day, 2-day, urgent event, you run out of something, speed is absolutely a vital part of that choice. There is also an element of speed selection simply based on convenience of knowing that it's going to come, right? It's knowing when. And that's the complexity that I think, certainly from a technology perspective, as well as providing the services. We provide the services. It's more, how does the consumer choose them? And the interesting thing is the recent growth in our industry of weekend delivery, and we're all delivering on weekends. But how does the consumer feel about that? Does that mean I have to remember to shop on a Thursday if I want a delivery on a Saturday, or can I choose weekend even if I'm shopping on a Monday? And it's a critical part of the experience. But now we're kind of living with the technology implications. And if you just consider a checkout, how many options are you going to choose from checkout to, in terms of speed? And do you even know? Versus, again, which is prevalent in the industry, we have a product called My Choice. Would you prefer to make the decision on at least part of that convenience and speed when just before you receive delivery? In other words, an intervention. The product has left the warehouse, it's on its way to you, and then you want to actually respond and say, hold on a minute, no, I don't need it today, I need it tomorrow. I want it to be shifted from my home location for delivery to my work location, or party location associated with that as well. So, I think back to our pan actually brought forwards the emphasis innovation, but I think the catch up and how you select it, how you decide, and whether even, let's get a little futuristic, whether even a machine learning application has decided that Andrew always wants everything in 24 hours and only offers you items for sale that can be delivered to you in 24 hours. So, speed is a big thing, but it is situational. I will say that, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, my sense, speed is maybe an important dimension to get closer to parity. But you say at a certain point that flexibility is really crucial. I think back to why Uber took off like a rocket ship in its early days. I think it had a lot more to do with the psychological certainty that it was giving people about when their ride would be there, much more so than it got you faster, from point A to point B. Sometimes it did. Maybe it was cheaper, but it was really that psychological certainty. And I think people want to be in control, especially with new issues arising like package theft and things of that nature. Making sure that it aligns with the time that you're home is of critical importance. So, Kate, as I've seen the emergence of e-commerce and mobile commerce take off in recent years, it strikes me that one of the maybe more underappreciated elements of that is payments, and just that there has been a real friction reduction in how easy it is to pay. We saw this in the early days of e-commerce in the desktop era, and I think really now we're right in the middle of that in mobile, where it's just getting easier and easier to pay through mobile devices. What do you see happening, and what kind of behaviors have been unlocked as the space continues to evolve?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different factors that merchants need to consider to address the needs of their consumers. So offering that Omni Channel experience that they can order online and do it seamlessly. So I think all of us are probably victim to an online checkout experience that has been very cumbersome and reaches a point of abandonment just because it asks for too much information or details around the payment and where the goods are going. So again, offering that solution online, and there are technologies that are being introduced to streamline and standardize the payment experience for online checkout. Secure remote commerce is that technology and capability that has started to see an upward trend in adoption from merchants for their online experiences. And again, these are experiences that customers, if you think about the Amazon experience, it's a great experience. You have all your information on there. You just load your shopping cart and click to check out. That's the experience that our consumers demand. When a merchant can't offer a solution of that magnitude, it may in turn result in a lost transaction or lost sale for that consumer. So again, I think it's important for them to introduce these seamless experiences, but also keep in mind the security of the information that's being transferred. So authentication of that user is a technology and capability that merchants must consider.
Now, speaking more about frictionless commerce, I think another element of that is that it's never been easier to start an e-commerce business. So it's not just the consumer, it's actually from the retailer perspective. You have so many brands that are cropping up today built on some combination of, a new tech stack with maybe Amazon Web Services, Shopify, and then some payments and logistics partnerships. Nick, I'm curious, as we watch 1,000 new flowers bloom seemingly every day in the e-commerce space, there's just more and more e-tailers out there. Tell me your thoughts on the emergence of this new ecosystem and what that means for where e-commerce is headed.
Yeah, 1,000 new flowers bloom. I tried to triangulate for some of the larger earnings releases on numbers of new small businesses that went online for the first time, or even stopped counting at 500,000. It's got to be millions, certainly around the world, but big numbers in the US as well. And I think that's a fantastic development. I mean, the smaller companies are already over the last 10 years, it's still been a little dominated by the big getting bigger and the smaller getting very innovative and very fast. Now, I think the playing field is of not just who the merchant can access. Now, you can access a technology stack that you can get online with a store in 2 hours. It used to take weeks, if not months, and you needed a software engineer to do it. And it's integrated. You have, my services, logistics, and services integrated into it. But you also have, it comes ready-made with payment. It comes ready-made with checkout. Even demand generation types of services, as well as the shell to build a web store. And I actually think that the innovation taking to serve and to actually well above their weight is a tremendously exciting area. And what we're seeing companies actually look at expanding from what was historically a specialized role, like either a or even the front end, even demand generation, like some of the social media companies or search companies now actually offering through to the consumer as well. Right? They're also, you take the Shop app from Shopify. The Shop app now allows, let's say, if you version of it a misses with their consumers in a similar way that only the very largest have to do through an enrolled community. So, yeah, I think from COVID, fantastic innovation going on in that space, which is very exciting. Because at the end of the day, one of the challenges for everybody, for instance, has always been the cost of customer acquisition as reach. And now they already have millions of merchants connected to them, and millions of consumers. Why not innovate in that space to these e-commerce platforms, as we call them, to an accelerating development from the pandemic, Andrew?
So let's wrap up talking a bit about Omni Channel here. So one of the big things we've seen, as we talked about, is the rise of click and collect, and maybe more specifically curbside. Given that, as we look at the holidays coming up and the expectation of unprecedented increases in order volume, it occurs that in some sense that click and collect capabilities can become a bit of a lifeline to help offload some of that capacity or the risk of capacity overload. Can you talk a bit about expectations around that trend, and is this something that can be really helpful here in the near term?
Yeah, holiday season and a shopping season, and you wouldn't be surprised to know that trying to develop models to predict what's going to happen in it. But yeah, I see the expectation, it goes to the forwards to some market projections for 2023 would certainly have expected a significant proportion of e-commerce deliveries to have flowed through some type of bricks and mortar touch point, curbside pickup, and pieces of that kind. And the adjustment was expected. So we're now at 2023 volume levels. So how fast it becomes used this holidays, I think it's going to be significant proportion still. I think that, and I think it's obviously experience is what the consumer chooses, so it's good for the market. And you have to remember that those packages still flow where they flow. I think it's a good thing for the market, for the consumer, for the experience, because choice is a great thing. How much of the volume that we expect, the capacity of the volume of orders gets delivered that way, I couldn't predict, Andrew, right now. And if somebody can, accurate, significant proportion, not quite sure it will be as high as last holidays. That's the only thing.
So we've got just a couple minutes left. I want to wrap up on casting out a little bit into the future. So we're talking a lot about the innovations that are hitting an inflection point now, and maybe what it means in the next 1, 2, and 3 years. When we think maybe 10 years ahead, there's all these interesting technologies that are starting to bubble up today. They're in pilot tests. The technology is there. They're live. but they probably will take more time to gain wide mainstream adoption. So I'm curious, when you think about 10 years from now, what is the technology that you are most excited about that will be most transformative or potentially transformative to the way that consumers are behaving?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and take that one first here, Andrew. I think inherent in my role in the payments industry, I'm going to lean on some of the payment technologies that are out there and continue to emerge. So we spoke quite a bit about QR code. And again, there's a lot behind the experience that QR code can offer, not only for conducting the payment, but the information that can be transferred to the consumer. And similarly, on the e-commerce side, creating that seamless experience for the checkout so that the consumer isn't thinking about the payment or where the goods are being stored. So it's creating that transfer of information and data to complete the transaction and ship the goods to the consumer. And I would say, I think all of these technologies need to be centered around three aspects. And again, we've hit on a few of these today. So it's the convenience to the consumer. They want to transact how they wish to transact in the marketplace. About control. So they want to transact on their terms. They don't want to be offered different promotions or bombarded with items that wouldn't be of their interest. And again, context. So creating the relevant content or merchandise that a consumer would be looking for in a retail environment. So again, pillared on three themes: the convenience, control, and context for the user.
And Nick, to wrap up, same question to you. What do you see as the most exciting and interesting technologies 10 years from now? And looks like we lost Nick. So I think we'll sort of wrap up the discussion. I don't know if we have any questions from the audience. If so, we'll take those now. And if we don't have any additional ones, then we'll wrap it up here.
Andrew, I'd be curious, do you have a passionate item that you're excited about over the next 10 years or 10 years from now?
The one that I would have been a real skeptic about before, and then I had some conversations about it, was drone delivery. What's so interesting about that to me, so I don't know if I like the idea of drones buzzing around overhead. That's a totally different future that I'm not ready to consider just yet. But when I think about, what kind of creates huge consumer unlocks, what's exciting about drone delivery to me is that you start to get all sorts of, one-off small transactions that don't make economic sense to deliver to somebody today. There's delivery costs for food. What if I just want, a cup of coffee or an ice cream? All of a sudden, I can get my coffee hot delivered to me. I can get ice cream delivered to me, not melted. And, maybe that delivery cost is only $1 because it can come so quickly. So as I consider that future, I see the potential for a lot of offline behavior to move online. And that's very interesting to consider. Mm-hmm. And I think that brings us up to the time. So this is the end of our session. I'd really like to thank Nick Basford and Kate Weiler, our guests today, for their time and insights. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions in the show.
Bye.